Alrighty. Now we've switched over to Ableton to basically we're gonna do. We'll briefly visit the kick and bass development department for this situation in Ableton, and we'll cover some of the drums. Most of it we'll be going back over the same production concepts, so we won't go through it as slowly as we did in Logic, but we'll get some stuff into it, and then we'll get to some sound design ideas and how to synthesize some strange noises. Now we got us a kick drum here, which is of course not going anywhere. And why is that? That is a good question. Let's look. Let's look. Aha, sends only. That's why. All right. Now this kick, since we're in D, this is a dual layer. This is a dual layer kick. I'm using the operator to make the tap. The reason why I may use the operator to make the tap is I was actually trying to make a kick drum in operator, but I had some problems. Let me turn this. Let me turn the volume up, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. It's okay, but if we listen to that ultra beat kick that we made, it's not got the tap. It's not like super punchy. It's a little soft. It's got more of a Goa style kick. Now, if we go back to how kick drums are created, we have the operator's pitch envelope. We've got a very nice slope set on it, very nice envelope, really nice curve, but it only goes up 48 semitones. When we looked at that, when we looked at the ultra beat, I had it modulating from D1 to D6, which is 5 octaves, and each octave incorporates 12 semitones. 12 multiplied by 5 is 60. So we need at least another octave range out of this. So I was a little bummed. It's like, I really wanted to use operator to make this kick, but c'est la vie. So I opened up this third-party synthesizer, which I usually use for most of my kicks, called Bassism. This follows the Infected Mushroom tutorial pretty much to the letter. And what I did first is I set the root note, which by right-clicking on Bassism, I select D, because that's where I'm going to want to write in. And if you look over here, the frequency start, this is where the pitch envelope, this is where the decay starts at. This is how high it's going to start from. I have this mathematically set to be like, basically 10 octaves up, roughly, from 73.4 hertz to 7,341 hertz. You can adjust things as you want, but mathematically, just because I was feeling weird, basically. I usually don't get so rigid about things, but just for the sake of argument, we will make it that way today. So this alone is already a good kick, but I really wanted to incorporate this in somehow. And if you layer them on top of each other, you got some weird kind of boxy, like plasticky kind of sounding interference going on. So we have to sit down and identify what we like about each sound. I like a lot of the knock. I like some of the tap, but the low end is relatively lacking. The low end is definitely not lacking in this. In fact, the tap is just fine too. I just want an extra little mid flavor in it. So now that we put these on top of each other, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off the low end using, I could use an EQ8, but I'll use the auto filter for this. And we'll sweep it down. Just till where it sounds kind of good. So now we've got this little thing on top of this other thing, and we're just going to reduce the volume a little bit. So we're just hearing just a little bit from the operator, but it's, if we remove it, it adds just a hint of something. Just a hint of something. It's not noticeable, but it's there. So that's how we came to this kick. The bassism is really, really solid. I use it a lot for pretty much almost all my kicks, especially when I'm using Ableton. But I mean, I'll use it in Logic as well when I am not feeling like using Ultrabeat, or sometimes I can't really get Ultrabeat to sound as good as I was able to get it to sound today, which is just kind of funny. There's just something clicked today of all days, like, oh, now I can make that kick the way I want to. Thank you guys for that opportunity. Now we have bass line. Now, on the bass line, I have a third party. I have Diva in here. I own Diva. It's very solid. It makes interesting bass, but it wasn't really what I wanted for this particular bass. And surprisingly enough, Operator gave me exactly what I needed. And the patch on Operator is very simple. It's just a single oscillator. It's tuned down to be relatively low. And it's got a low pass, 24 decibel per octave low pass filter on it with some decay. I mean, with a bit of filter envelope on it. And here's what happens. Now, there is some extra processing that makes it really, really good, and I'll disable that. Now, it doesn't quite seem quite as tight, but we just want to get the initial sound. I'll take this straight D. I forgot I've got some follow action funny stuff going on. We'll get to follow actions in a little bit. All right. Now we'll use this particular oscillator for once, just because we can. We'll just change the routing. Okay, now this is set to be a sine wave oscillator right now. We just change that. I'll use saw D because I like it. Now, kind of high. For if you're doing full on, this would be a good range. This might be higher, even high for some full on, but for me, it's an octave too high. So we'll drop it. And this is to show how important the filter is for shaping the sound. Because this is like, what the? You hear that at a dance floor, you're going to be like, what the heck? But this sounds contained. So what we'll do is we'll set the envelope to 0. And we'll set everything to 0. And we'll make the envelope something obnoxious. Right now there's 0 decay, 0 sustain, 0 release. And it's just plucking, basically. And we'll adjust the decay till it sounds good. And I'll give it a little bit of sustain. Now this is like using incredibly aggressive envelope settings, so we can back off on that a little bit. Now, this does have a click in it, but I'll let this one slide. There we go. Makes it a hair funny, but that's all you get. The next increment up is either click or a little off. I think I'll just go for the click in this particular case. It's not that big of an ordeal. So this is just simple. This is just a simple patch. The note length has been altered using the note length plugin. So I'm having most of the note length go through, but it still stops a little short, so everybody will re-trigger properly. This is Diva. This is the Diva bass. Now, Diva makes really awesome bass most of the time, but I couldn't really get this one nailed too well. Crap. Follow actions. Follow actions. We'll get to that. Okay, so Diva's not going to fly for us. That's got a little bit of meat to it. So that's the synth. Now we'll get to this stuff. Now these are Max for Live devices right here. And this particular Max for Live device is... I never really even knew about what this thing does until I tried it. This is a free device that's put in the maxforlive.com forum where somebody just made this using Max MSP inside of Ableton. And what it does is it reads the frequency of your bass note and then it notches out a particular harmonic. The rhetoric for this one is apparently there's something called the evil tritone, which is supposed to be the sixth note in a scale. So let's say you have a C, D, E, F, G, A. So it's gonna pull out A and notch it out using like a notch EQ to pull out that particular frequency. And so if you change that C, the root note, or whatever note you're putting through, you change it from C to D or anything else, it's going to the frequency for that dip will move accordingly. So you can basically write pretty melodic bass lines, or you can have the notes jump around and not have to worry about any sort of drastic EQ cuts happening that interfere with the new bass note. So this is, I'll turn off. Yeah, I'll just turn off this other thing. This other thing here is very similar, but it just reads based upon MIDI note. So I've got it set to notch out a particular muddy harmonic that will it decided to say, no, Greg, I'm not going to play. I'm not going to play, Greg, not at all. Huh, that's odd. That's definitely odd. Just when I was touting all the good things about this thing. Oh, wow. That's very interesting. This has only happened to me a couple of times where Ableton has decided to not respond whatsoever. Let's see. Let's see if that solves anything. Sometimes it might just freak out from my controller. We're back at it again. Okay. So now that that little bit of mess is over, I just disable. I have sidechain compression going arbitrarily, basically. You don't really need it, but sometimes it makes things feel better. So now the best way to find out what a plugin is doing to change the sound or to do anything to a sound is to bypass it. It's subtle, but you can totally feel it. So I have got this thing to notch out just a little bit of mud around the 500 hertz range. By pulling out that little bit of mud, it accentuates the other frequencies that haven't been cut and provides a little bit more sense of force. So that's kick and bass. Right now it's being routed to just the channel where it's turned into mono. There's no further processing on it currently. Now, drums, I took the liberty of putting together a little drum kit, but we can go over this particular this snare that I did for you guys. It is a 2-layer snare as well. And we'll just do a simple snare pattern. This is done using, instead of white noise, looped noise. You can do that. You can do the white noise or the loop noise. I think the loop noise tends to give it a little bit of a different flavor, different bite than the normal white noise. And the second is just a little tap. Just a little tap. I've got my snare. In most dance music, the snare is incredibly important. It's almost just as important as the kick drum because it symbolizes like a reinforcement on the second and fourth beats. So when I think about mixing my drums, I think that my snare is probably the loudest thing out of all of my drums. But still, it still needs to be somewhere below where the kick drum and bass line is, because that's the kick drum and bass line takes first precedence, then your snare, and then you can start playing around with the volume levels of the other guys. So if the kick drum is at -10, bass line's anywhere from -11 to between -10 to -12. I would want my snare to be at the loudest -12, but maybe like 13 or 14 like we have here. So that's okay. This particular time, did I make hi-hats? I sampled hi-hats for this one. Okay, well that's okay. I'm using my Launchpad to program in this hat pattern. I would alter the velocity on this particular. I could do it on the MIDI, or I can also use Ableton's MIDI effect of the velocity plug. Put it on right beforehand. I'll change the out so the out never gets super high. And then I'm going to randomize it. And I also have a replicant to do a little roll. So basically, it'll perform a little roll while the normal hat pattern is playing. So it kind of doubles, but I kind of like the effect that it has on it. You can set it up to where you could duck it whenever it rolls, but I want them to double up in this particular case. I've also got this thing set up to do a little bit of random panning and the velocity. So that gives it a little bit of a feel. Of course, it's random, but I don't feel that there's anything wrong with a little bit of random every now and again. So that's kick, bass, drums. There's a whole bunch of samples that are in here that I used for the percussion, because I'll use samples too. It's all good. Especially for the open hi-hat, because I can't for the life of me synthesize an open hi-hat. So now let's talk about synths. Let's talk about synthesis. Let's talk about the parts of a synthesizer. We'll start with an oscillator. How many of you guys are familiar with what oscillators are? For those that aren't necessarily fully familiar, oscillators are what generate all of our sounds. This is the component that makes the noise. When we're discussing psychedelic trance, you might hear a couple of different synthesis techniques thrown around, terminology thrown around, like subtractive synthesis, additive synthesis, FM synthesis, granular, or pulsar. There's all types of crazy things. When it comes to psychedelic trance, the majority of the sounds that are made can be accomplished using subtractive synthesis. What subtractive synthesis is very much akin to a sculptor. When a sculptor makes a sculpture, he takes a large body, a large lump of clay, and whittles it down, removes the elements that he doesn't need to make the shape or the finished product that he actually wants. In subtractive synthesis, this is the same process. We start with a raw sound from the oscillators, and we use filters to shape that sound. We also use we can also use volume envelope as well to shape the sound too. We'll use the analog just to give a brief look at how some of this stuff works. I'll go ahead and I like C. We're in D, so we'll use D2, and I'll just draw a relatively long note, 8-bar note. Why not? This is undoubtedly probably going to be incredibly loud, so I got to turn it down. So what makes this sound, because it's two oscillators, now you have the octave. Now, I'm leaving this down here specifically so you get a good idea of what that sound sounds like when you drag an oscillator, especially a sawtooth oscillator, all the way down. It's got some interesting characteristic to it. This is one of the tricks that I use for some of my sound design. So now we have the oscillator, and it goes directly to a filter. The filter is what shapes the sound. There are several types of filters, and how many of you guys are familiar with the different types of filters? Okay, excellent, excellent. So we've got the low pass, which the low pass basically will go from this cutoff frequency and remove any frequency that is above it. So anything that is lower than the cutoff will pass through, hence the terminology low pass. Then you have the high pass, which is the opposite of the low pass, where it's anything higher than this cutoff frequency will get passed through, anything lower will be rejected. You have a band pass filter, which basically creates like a little knuckle, where it's a little bubble within the sound, where any of the frequencies within that range of that bubble will pass through unaffected. But if you're not part of that group, then you won't come through at all. And I'll briefly go into notch filters because the notch is an inverse of the bandpass. It dips out. Uh, some of you might have noticed that you guys might perform frequency cuts, or you pull out a narrow band, or you pull out just an odd harmonic or something like that. That is basically what a notch EQ is, or a notch filter is by plucking out the frequencies that you don't want, but leaving everything else intact. Now let's get to how these sound. We'll start with the low pass filter. And there's two types of filters. There's a 12 decibel per octave, which means it'll filter the sound to a certain steepness where there'll still be some hint of the sound past the cutoff frequency that'll come through, but not nearly as clear. And the 24 decibel it's cutting off a lot more around that with the cutoff frequency and not letting too much else get through. We'll be able to tell the difference by let's turn this up a hair. See how you can hear how it's dulling. Bring it all the way down to nothing, and then back up. Now that's a 12. That's a 12 decibel per octave. Now let's do the 24. Already you can tell it's like steeper. It's already less getting through. The 12 decibel per octave low pass filter is typically what's used to sculpt bass lines. Now let's use a high pass. After a certain point, it kind of disappears because there isn't very much energy happening around the 7K range for this particular sound. Now, then there's the 12 decibel, which is going to cut off less of the low end. And we'll do the band pass. I wanted to give you guys an idea of how these things sound before we add resonance. Because once you add resonance, everything changes. It's actually kind of hard to hear the band pass in this. It's because it's a pretty simple sound. So for this, I'll just make a high pass filter. But first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the octave. Then we're going to go into resonance. What resonance is around the cutoff frequency, whatever the cutoff frequency is, resonance boosts the frequencies right around the cutoff frequency. So it'll exaggerate the cutoff. Now, you can already hey, that kind of sounds like something that sounds kind of interesting. I might have heard this before. This is one of my sounds for sure. It's one of the sounds I use all the time. I call it like the growl. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set the envelope to be the amplitude envelope just to be stagnant, no worries. And this thing here is a modulation source. It is called an LFO. What LFO stands for is a low frequency oscillator. Basically, it's exactly the same thing as one of these, but it's meant to operate so low that you won't really hear it because it operates at ranges below what human hearing is at 20 hertz. Now, really good LFOs can go to all the way up to audio rate and down to like really low frequency, but in this particular case, if you're just looking for an LFO, it's only going to go, in this case, this only goes to 17 hertz, which is below the rate of human hearing. So what this is doing is it reads the waveform or the type of wave just like an oscillator does, and it's going to use the shape of the waveform and its frequency to modulate something, to modulate a source. So in this case, I think I want to do two different things. I would like to modulate the pitch of this thing to give it a nice little dynamic effect, but I also want to modulate the filter cutoff. Now, analog only allows you to have per voice up here. This is, you could consider it like a two-voice thing, where it's got a oscillator amplitude pairing. It only allows you to have one LFO. So LFO 1 only deals with what's on oscillator 1. LFO 2 only deals with what's on this down here, oscillator 2, filter 2, amplitude 2. But fortunately, the guys at Ableton are really nice, and they give us this 2 filter 2 mix parameter. So let's turn this up, and we're going to send the entire thing. Yeah, I think so. We're going to send the entire thing to filter 2. And filter 2 is where we're going to have our high-pass filter with the resonance. Let's see if this actually works. We'll turn on the amplitude on oscillator 2. Turn it up all the way. Turn off the release. Let's see. Okay. It works. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have LFO 1. Oh, we'll just do it all the way. Now you got this little pitch modulated zipper thing happening. Now let's turn on LFO 2, and we'll have that modulate the filter. So, you already have, like, a weird sound just by modulating a couple of things. And LFO really helps in this. Now, what makes it really interesting, let's look at what happens with the pitch. If I change the LFO's waveform, let's say to sine, the pitch starts taking on the characteristic of the sine wave. It's a smooth ride. It's a smooth ride, and it kind of bubbles over a certain point and back down. If I were to use the triangle wave, it's going to come right up to that point and back down, kind of steep-like. Both have their uses. It's really either, depends on which one gives you the feel. So now I have something, I have the second LFO modulating a different rate, slightly different, but, you know, you can just play with these. And I always encourage you to modulate these, too. Record yourself moving things, you know. Get the rate going real fast. That could be kind of interesting. Okay, now let's try the bandpass filter. Ah, that's what I'm talking about. All right, we'll just throw on some delay. So by having this modulation going on and just, moving maybe one or two things, actually, just to make it even more fun, we'll group this in a rack, send this to a macro. Set that to macro 1. Set that to macro 2. Set that to macro 3. Okay. So what you can pick up from this sound is two of the main concepts of modulation for psychedelic trance. The two easiest things, or the two most noticeable things to modulate, are the frequency in which the sound is heard or perceived, which can be the pitch, and can be the filter, or the timbre of the sound, like the characteristics, like what makes it that sound. A lot of the tricks, a lot of sound design stuff that I'll teach you, it's going to be predominantly pitch modulation with some frequency modulation to add into taste. But for some things, we can also like do some timbral changes as well. So we've gotten this nifty little analog squirrely, we'll call it squirrely for fun. Okay. Now, of course, it's obviously probably way too loud, and it'll probably need further processing afterwards. But for a start, that's a good start. Let's make a new MIDI channel. And we'll use an operator this time to make something else. Let's see, what are we going to do with the operator? Let's cover some relatively rudimentary FM. FM, or frequency modulation, is a nifty way of it's like modulating the pitch, but it's even on a different scale. Now, there's two types of FM. There's pseudo FM, which is usually used for a lot of the general sound design, where it's not really stacking oscillators on top of each other. How frequency modulation comes into play is the history of it. Actually, there's a synthesizer made by Yamaha called the DX7 that thought of this interesting way to manipulate the pitch of an oscillator. It's like, well, we have this LFO thing down, but what if we used an oscillator that was tuned specifically to a harmonic relationship from the note that was being played, and we used that to modulate the pitch or the frequency of another oscillator? What would happen? Now, operator is one of these, is basically a rendition of the Yamaha DX7 in a lot of respects. It's got this nifty little, it's got these 4 oscillators. They're operators, and they function on octave level, like where this is at 1 is the root octave. This is like an octave down, and it goes all the way up to 48 octaves up. We can't hear that high most of the time. We can't hear that high. That's like bats and dogs dog area right there, even though the sequencer probably wouldn't allow you to do that, or the Fletcher Munson curve of all things anyway. But I digress. The way this is set up is it's got a few different configurations. And the way that it goes is this one at the bottom, this is what's going to be making the tone. Its frequency, its pitch is going to be modulated by the guy above that. This guy's pitch will be modulated by the guy above that, and so on. For this particular case, I just want to show you what happens with a two operator, with just using one oscillator to modulate the pitch of another one. So we're just going to start with a sine wave, and we'll mute him. And right now, just a sine, pretty vanilla, nothing going on. Now we're going to introduce the level, which is now already modulating the frequency. And it's the same pitch, but if we drop the pitch and we turn this off, this is the oscillator that's making the noise. Already you can get some ideas on how to modulate this to make the sound change over time. But that's an octave below. You can also change waveforms, like we were doing before for the bass. Let's drop that one more. And this particular interesting phenomenon is why I like FM synthesis. Let's go ahead and do this a different way. Now I'm going to have my frequency modulation, like I said, requires two things to work. It requires an oscillator that makes the sound and an oscillator that modulates the sound. Technical terms, the oscillator that makes the sound would be called the carrier oscillator. It's what's, carrying the pitch, carrying the tune. And then you have the modulator oscillator, which is modulating the frequency of the carrier. In this particular case, the carrier is oscillator 1 and the modulator is oscillator 2. I'm going to change the carrier oscillator to a sawtooth, and the modulator will make it a sine, just inverting what we had going on previously. Kind of crazy, huh? And that's just the oscillator. That's just the frequency modulation going on. What makes it happen the way that it does is the ratio in which the modulator is modulating the carrier. The chorus for this is set to 2, so it's like the second octave up. And this is set to half, so it is a quarter of this oscillator's frequency. When it modulates it by a quarter, it creates this nice little buzz that you'll find this buzz happening whenever you repeat something like a 64th note. I encourage everybody, I don't think I'm going to get a chance to get into it this particular session, but I encourage everybody when they get home, take a snare drum, take it from anywhere, doesn't matter. Take a snare drum and then shorten it to a 16th note and then repeat that thing. Repeat it to where it's, 64th notes, and all of them lined up make, I don't know, maybe like an eighth note or like even like a quarter note of length and just listen to what happens from there. It won't be any it won't be too far away from what this sounds like. And to get that from a snare, that's definitely something very interesting. So now let's filter this thing. Let's turn on the filter. We can use the band pass, or we can use high pass or low pass. Doesn't matter. Each one provides their own specific effect. And then, of course, we got to modulate it. Nah. We're going to modulate the filter. That already. Now, the only drawback about operator is they only give you one LFO. So it's sometimes a little limited to get to do things without actually having to hand modulate some stuff. But now that we've got this going, this is one of my FM leads, or this is one of the ways to get an FM lead uh, that I tend to do. I do use operator from time to time if I'm using Ableton, but I also use Surge, and I'm going to show you in Surge in just a second. But that's what we're looking for. So now let's open up Surge. And, I like the fact with Ableton, especially with 9, you can type in what you want. It saves time significantly. All right. Now, the reason why I love Surge is because of these 12 things right here. They say LFO, but they can be any shape, any waveform of LFO, as well as envelope and a step sequencer. And there's 12 of them, so you can really get creative with things. So I'm gonna show you the growl first, and a couple of variations on the growl, and then we'll do the FM lead, and we'll be able to pay attention to the type of once you have more than a couple of different modulators, and once you start modulating modulators, it just really opens up a whole new palette. So here's what we'll do. We're gonna just copy this particular thing over, and I need to mute that. All right. Very vanilla, very standard. First thing to do to get the growl, tune it all the way down. Textural. Second step, take an LFO, modulate the pitch. With Surge, you can extend the range of the pitch to where you can get some really... It actually goes like couple hundred, like 168 semitones either direction, but we don't really need nearly as much. I like when I modulate the pitch, if I can help it, I like setting up 24 semitones, which is the 2-octave range. For me, the reason why I like the 2-octave range is anywhere within like 2 octaves of the note the main note that I'm going to give is going to lend me a value that either it's going to be somewhat musically pleasing, perhaps. It might hit a value that's musically pleasing, probably won't be too high, or if it goes too low, it'll create a very nice textural thing. But if it goes up too high, then it can get a little weird, a little funny. So I like using 2 octaves as a range to work within when I'm setting the pitch. Now this is going bipolar down and up, but let's just say I want it to just go down. Now now that it's going down, I'm gonna extend the range. Now, put a high pass filter on that. And we'll set another LFO. It's just a little sound effect thing. Just a little something to like add some texture. Okay. Now for the most part, we've gotten just about exactly what we got before. It's like, oh, you only used 2 LFOs. Okay, now we can go and modulate the rate of this. Now this one is controlling the pitch. So maybe I will have LFO 3 control the rate. Okay, that seems pretty decent. Now, of course, we can modulate the rate of the LFO that's modulating the cutoff. So it's just a little something that I would probably use in the background. Just a little textural thing. So this is the growl in a nutshell. Tune it low, modulate the pitch. If you can modulate it straight down, it makes it more textural. If it goes both ways. Of course, that's also a little drastic. There we go. So there's that growl again. We'll go back to the initial preset. I'll show you my FM lead as well. Now this synth has interesting style of FM routing. So now oscillator 2's frequency will modulate oscillator 1, and here's the depth in which it does it. So now I'm going to set this. I like using the sine wave. And it's a resonant cutoff, resonant high pass filter. You know, since we've drawn such a long note here, let's use the envelope. So I'm going to switch it to an envelope. The reason why I really like Surge, and I'm using Surge specifically for this, is the envelope stages. Surge allows you to tempo sync each stage of the envelope. The envelope stage attack, which is from when you tell the thing to start, how long it takes to get to the desired modulation amount. Then you've got hold, which will hold it at its top level for a certain amount of time, which most envelopes don't come with a hold. This is just a nifty little thing you can add up that comes with it. Then there's the decay. Then once it's reached that top point of the modulation, the top point of what you're telling it to do, how long does it take for it to reach that top point to go back to what would be the sustain level or 0? This is what decay does. So then there's a sustain that after it's gotten through the decay, this is going to be the volume of which it's at after it's gotten to the decay, which you can see this thing moving, right here. And then the release is after you've let go of the key or told it to stop playing, how long does it take to actually stop doing what you told it to do? In this particular case, since I've got an 8-bar, it's an 8-bar MIDI pattern, I'm going to set this to be 8. Actually, no, we'll do 4 bars in, and we'll tempo sync the decay, and we'll do that as a 4-bar as well. Okay, so we'll cover this last little bit of this thing here. So now I'm gonna have this envelope control the modulation upwards, so the cutoff is going to rise as it comes along. And then it's gonna come back down. Well, it's supposed to come back down at least. Oh, that's why. Gotta turn down sustain. So now you can use the envelopes to control how long modulation can occur, or how long things will happen, how long it takes for things to happen. It's a really great way to make swells. In the brief time that we have left, I'll show you a really quick swell idea. So we're going to take some noise, our good old friend noisy, noisy noise. It would help if I made oscillator 1 the noise oscillator, though. Okay. Dirty. Now we just attach a low pass filter, set it to where we can't really hear it. Then we're going to create, and we'll just make this an 8-bar swell. So we're going to create an envelope by turning this into an envelope, tempo syncing it, making it 8 bars, and then we click on it to enable the modulation, and it's going to come up that. It's going to come up all the way. So now that you can take that concept of things moving over time, we're going to copy this setting, paste it here, and since this is one of my favorite tricks to do with Surge, where I'll have a reverb and I'll use an envelope to basically modulate the send amount, so it creates a little reverb swell as well, and it gives it a little bit of a, fade out. So that's perfect for sweeps, or for rises and so on. Last one we'll do too is we'll do a pitch rise of, let's say 48 semitones. See what happens. So yeah, you can do rises that way as well. And all it really is just setting the attack on the envelope to hopefully be close to as long as you want it to be. It helps if you can tempo sync the envelope stages, but if not, this is why there's that time calculator, so you can figure out how long you want that attack to be before you can before it does what it needs to do. I do apologize that we weren't able to get through as much stuff as I really wanted to, but I do hope that I've been able to help you guys out with a few things. And if we do ever get another opportunity to do this again, I would love to cover arrangement and what to do when you've got a whole bunch of sounds and you want them all in there, but there's no possible way to fit them all. There's a few ways around that. as this last little thing, I think we're going to quickly show. Does anybody know what follow actions are inside of Ableton? This is a very, 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 very powerful thing. It basically allows you to randomize when clips are going to play. Now, it's perfect for session view, but it also really works really well for arranging things or like putting together an arrangement, or if you just really get bored. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rig up some follow actions on this channel of lots of sounds for it to happen every 3/16 notes, and it's going to choose anything but itself. We'll see how it works. Might not be any good. Who knows? All right. Now we got that going. Let's... So it's just randomly playing. Now, and follow actions, you can... Oh, something extra loud in there. Oh, well. That follow action tip, that follow action trick, I actually learned from a Complextro production video. Somebody making Complextro was like, "Hey, here's a trick. Why don't you record the same MIDI passage, the same MIDI part through as many different synths as you possibly can, and then set up follow actions to switch between them, so you can have them all playing the same thing, but it's different sounds playing the same thing." And I was like, "Well, they're all playing the same thing. That's boring. Let's just make a whole bunch of different things and have it randomly switch between them." And that is definitely a way to go about it. There's also ways to set it up to where you can actually send MIDI from one item to a slew of different items, but we didn't have an opportunity to get to that today. I am very, 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 very happy that you guys were able to sit down and for me to come here and even explain a little bit of like how I go about some of the weird stuff that I go about. I do apologize that we didn't get to some of the really severe weird stuff, and we didn't really get as heavily into synthesis as I wanted to. But also for me in the production department, my kick and bass take forever for me to nail down. So it's only fitting that during this discussion that we've been having, a majority of the focus was towards the kick and bass as well. I want to thank you guys for coming, and I'm welcome to answer any questions that you have.
Very much like to thank Pyramind for hosting me here once again. I think this institution is really cool, and until I came here for the first time, I had never seen anything like it in my whole life.
What I think really separates us from other people who teach is that we are outrageously passionate about what we do, and especially in electronic music.
Since coming to Pyramind, I've discovered electronic music, and San Francisco being a mecca for underground electronic music opened up so many doors for me and kind of blew my mind.
We cover everything from absinthe to contact. When people get to the mind-melting level, we get into modular synthesis.
Everything about native instruments, everything about Logic synths down to the finest detail. We learned it all.
The fundamentals of understanding how things work, that's just essential. But then beyond that, there's so much more, and that's where it gets into just a lot of the artistic side of like the creative approach of why you do something, not just how.
There's a lot of schools that just, they focus on the technicality of recording music, but I wanted something that would foster creativity and really help me develop as an artist as well.
Each of our genre-specific programs comes in 4 levels. There's a basic, an advanced, a professional, and then a master's level. And the master's level is, of course, everything we do. It's the largest and most powerful programs that we can create for you.